Guild Wars 2's Power Reaper, one of my personal favorites for raiding, fractals, and even open world. This class has got a lot going for it. Lots of CC, DPS, and utility. Brilliant for new players and also good for players that have mastered the game. Let's have a look at why this class is just so damn good. What's making this class so good is basically you've got tons of access to CC. The amount of CC bars you can personally rig in fractals, raids, and open world allow you to be very self-sufficient. You've got access to a lot of personal boons. Your Reaper form has got a lot of quickness as well as might attached to it. That means you're less reliant on your boon givers, especially if they're not up to scratch. The only boon you might struggle a little bit more with is Alacrity as well as Fury. Very easy to learn this rotation, very fluid, it's not too complicated compared to a lot of other classes, and especially the fact that it's hitting so close to top benchmark with such a fluid, easy rotations, making this class so attractive for newer players. And probably one of the biggest ones is the AoE cleave of a Reaper is massive. If you walk into an open world event like Triple Trouble, you're going to be topping those DPS meters by a mile. Even in raiding as well as fractals, you'll be melting not just the boss but all of the ads around. And for the negatives, probably the biggest negative is the fact that your Reaper form's life force gets drained when you take damage. This makes it quite tough for new players who may be positioning correctly or don't know mechanics of the fight. Some other negatives is that some of your skills, especially in Reaper form, have forced movement. This can mean that you're by mistake moving into mechanics that could one-shot you if you use them in the wrong times. As well, if you don't use certain weapons like a staff, you don't really have access to ranged DPS. So looking at the build and weapons used, kind of gauge where your experience is, and I'll give you a couple of options that I think are very good. Hey, I'm streaming on Twitch. Possible link above me right here. Who knows? Yeah, I'd love to see you there. Stop by, hang out. Could be good. Could be playing Guild Wars. Could be playing some other game. Anyway, I'll see you there. And having a look at your gear and equipment, basically what you want to aim for is everything Berserkers. There are a couple of options now on how to go. You can either just have an amulet that is assassins, or you can use, say, a helmet that's assassins and a couple of precision pieces and a couple of other ways. Basically, you want to end up with 75% crit chance so that when we apply Fury, we're crit capped. For runes, Rune of the Dragon Hunter is performing slightly better than Rune of the Scholar, but if you only have Rune of the Scholar, perhaps at your old Reaper build, obviously Rune of the Scholar will still be a very good option. Then for Relic, we want to go for the Relic of Firework. This is performing the best currently. Now for weapons, there are a couple of good options. Greatsword is pretty much one of your non-negotiable ones. It performs very high. Then there are a couple of options after that. You can either go for Dagger Torch, you can go for Axe Warhorn, or you can go for the Staff. The Staff is something I would recommend for newer players as it gives you a bit of range in certain situations. If you do take this onto open world, having this 1200 range on skills is quite paramount, and also it brings a little bit of extra utility. Decent also for AoE tapping. However, if you do not have access to the Staff, obviously the older build with the Axe still has your 900 range, which is quite good. This allows you to do quite a bit of DPS from range. However, currently the Dagger Torch is what's used for the benchmark, and it's performing pretty well. It's also pretty good in fractals as well. But all of these are fairly good in open world, raiding, and fractals at the moment, so either one could be used. And for your sigils, you're looking at Sigil of Accuracy and Sigil of Force. Basically, we need that 7% crit chance to cap our crit. As well, Sigil of Force, just 5% extra damage flat is just so good. However, if you are running something like a Dagger Torch, ignore the stats on this. You can always look at something like Sigil of Accuracy in the one and also Sigil of Impact in the other. You're basically going to switch to that and use it for your CC, so allowing yourself to have the Sigil of Impact to do more damage while the target CC'd in fractals works out fairly good. Now for food and utilities, pretty much the same as most other power builds. We're looking for something with power as its main stat, ferocity on the off stat, like your sweet and spicy butternut squash soup or the ascended variants thereof. Obviously the one with crit lifesteal is pretty good to have. And then for utility, you want something like the potent superior sharpening stones. The combination of this and this will give us some really high bench. Now for our traits and specializations. Specialization number 1, Spite. Minor trait 1, Reaper's Might. This is quite big because this allows us to gain a stack of might on every auto attack swing. So all 3 in your chain will give you a stack of might each. This is where a lot of our self boon reliance comes from. In column 1, we're going to go for Spiteful Talisman. What this does is it increases our damage to targets with our boons, as well as reduces the cooldown on focus and axe skills. This is why in the old times we used to use axe and focus for our offset, and that's why it's still fairly good. What we obviously want to do is make sure that there are no boons on targets. Boon rip is massive to try and make sure that we're doing some big DPS. The other traits like Spiteful Renewal, basically what we're doing is we're healing when we remove a condi from ourselves, and Bitter Chill. These can be pretty good, especially the fact we are going to be applying a lot of chill. So if vulnerability uptime is an issue, this might be worth it to go rather than Spiteful Talisman, because this will equate to more overall group DPS. So have a look in your fractal group or your open world whether you are basically capping your vulnerability on a target, and if not, consider changing. But if you have a really good raid group where everything seems to be done, then Spiteful Talisman is going to give you a lot more DPS. Minor trait 2, Death's Embrace. Pretty big skill, basically increasing our down damage, which is obviously really good because this allows us to possibly rally, especially if you are going down in some sort of open world event. As well, when we strike targets below 50%, we are going to get 5 vulnerability stacks. Do notice that that is on a 10-second cooldown, so you can't maintain that 5 stacks, but it's still good to have. Now in column 2, we are going to go for Awaken the Pain. What this does is it allows us to gain more power from might and less condition damage from might. And because we are power class predominantly, this is going to equate to quite a substantial amount of DPS. As well, we are going to gain 5 stacks of might when we enter Shroud. So this trait is pretty big in structured groups. However, obviously if you are on the open world, or if you're struggling with condis on bosses, you can look at Chill of Death. Minor trait 3 is actually deceptively good. Siphon Power. When we start to strike a target below its 50% health, for every 1 second cooldown, we're going to be getting 3 stacks of might, and that lasts 8 seconds. So towards the tail end of a fight, you're pretty much self-sustaining on might almost from this skill alone. So it's pretty massive. Now in column 3, Close to Death, massive skill. What this does is when the target is below 50% health, we're doing 20% more damage. Simple as that. Really good skill to have. And that's going to basically round out Spite and give us a massive amount of DPS. However, if you are on the open world, or if you're really struggling in certain fights, skills and traits like Dread could be pretty good. What this does is when you inflict fear, it gives you quickness and fury. As well, when you kill foes, you recharge in charge skill 3 by 50%. And this allows you to obviously gain some really good things like stab and things like this. So if you are struggling, this can be something you can look at. And also in column 3 is Spiteful Spirit. This can be pretty massive in fractals, especially when you have certain instabilities where perhaps the targets you're striking are gaining boons, or when a target dies, the enemies, the NPCs around gain boons. Having Spiteful Spirit could basically just help boon rip AoE, so this can be quite big in some instances. Then for your second specialization, Soul Reaping. Minor trait 1, Gluttony. What this allows you to do is gain life force by an extra 10% on all sources. So any source or skill that would have given you life force is just going to give you a little bit more. In column 1, Unyielding Blast is generally the way we go. What this allows you to do is when using Shroud skill 1, i.e. your auto attack, will be inflicting vulnerability as well. So this is a massive source of vulnerability overall for your fractal group, your raid group, or even on open world. However, if you do use a staff, have a look at something like Soul Marks, making marks unblockable as well as generating extra life force. This can be quite big. Minor trait 2, Sinister Shroud. This just allows your Shroud skills to recharge 15% quicker, and that can be quite big in terms of your rotation. Obviously, we know, and it's passive, that we are taking Soul Reaping, but having this on just allows your rotation to feel as fluid and as good as what it does. In column 2, Soul Bobs. When entering and exiting Shroud, we're basically getting an increase in damage by 10% for 15 seconds. We're generally maintaining this buff on continuously, and yeah, it's just extra increased damage. If you are struggling though, you can have a look at something like Fear of Death. What this does is it allows your fear effects to basically increase in duration, i.e. more CC, as well as giving you life force. So if you're using something like your Star 5, This makes it 2 seconds as opposed to 1 second, and you gain quite a bit of life force from it. Minor Trait 3, Soul Battery. This increases our life force by an extra 20%. So life force is the number down here, and this is directly related to your health pool. So the more health you have, the larger your life force pool. But this skill just increases that by a further 20%. Now in column 3 we only have one option, and that's Death Perception. This increases our crit chance by 15%, so perhaps if you had done your gear without the selected, you might have noticed that you are only getting 60% crit chance. So this takes us up to the 75 that with Fury will get us crit capped. As well, we get increased crit damage when in Shroud. So this skill is basically what helps us crit cap as well as do massive DPS when in Shroud. And now for the elite specialization, Reaper. The first minor trait allows us to get access to Reaper Shroud, giving us new abilities when we use our F1 and go into Reaper Shroud. As well, it reduces all damage by 33% and changes our life force into health. What this means that any damage we take while in Reaper Shroud will first go off of our life force, and once that's depleted, obviously will kick us out of Reaper Shroud, and then all damage will go off of your health. So this is basically a way to have some damage reduction. However, by taking excess damage, it will kick us out of Reaper Shroud, which will obviously not allow us to do that big DPS that we want from that F1 abilities. In column 1, Chilling Nova is just too good to pass up. Chilling Nova, what this does is when critting on a target, causes an explosion that chills the adjacent foes, so the foes nearby, on a 3-second cooldown. So what this means is that because of our high cleave AoE, we're going to be chilling all the targets casting this skill quite often and just gaining this extra DPS from the skill. However, if you are struggling perhaps on open world, Augury of Death, a very good skill to have a look at. Shout skills now self and health. As well, the effect is increased when in melee range. This is just really good for survivability overall, especially if you are struggling to keep yourself up. Obviously, Relentless Pursuit can be pretty good if you are struggling with roots and immobilizers and things like this. Minor Trait 2, Shivers of Dread. What this does is inflicts chill when you inflict fear. So things like your Shroud skill 3, this will gain the chill effect, as well as things like your Star 5. So yeah, just a really overall good skill, because remember, we are going to gain a few extra effects from chill, as well as chill being quite a good soft CC. So having these on targets just allows you to get a bit of an extra head start on CC bars. Now in column 2, Soul Eater is preferred generally. What this does is when striking a target within 300 range, we're doing 10% increased damage, and we're also siphoning 4% of the damage as health. So yeah, just good lifesteal, keeping you up. This is also really good for your open world, fractals, things like that. And yeah, just a really good skill in general. The other skills, Chilling Victory if you are struggling for a bit of might and life force. Minor Trait 3 is a massive skill, and I know I said the word massive a lot, but this is basically where a lot of these chill effects that we've seen come into play. Chills last longer, which is just a standard really good, increased by 20%. But most importantly, chilled foes take increased damage from your attacks by 15%. So having chill on foes, you know, through Chilling Nova, Shivers of Dread, all of these skills just allow you to do 15% more damage on the target, which is obviously massive. And in column 3, Reaper's Onslaught, just too good to pass up. You're gaining 300 Veracity, and you're gaining quickness when you enter into Shroud form. So basically you can maintain quickness on yourself in Shroud, which is really big. As well, when hitting Life Reap, which is the first skill on your auto attack, you're reducing the cooldown of your Shroud skills by 1 second. So yeah, just an incredibly good skill. We need this to basically maintain our rotation. So yeah, Reaper's Onslaught, absolutely huge. But obviously you can consider Blighter's Boon if you are in the open world and you are struggling to heal and keep up your life force, things like this. But for DPS, there's just no better option than Reaper's Onslaught. Now let's have a look at our utilities. For healing skills, we're spoiled for choice with option. Your Soulless Mind Shout skill, where you basically heal yourself, gain life force, as well as strike foes around you. This effect is increased if they're in melee range, and you gain life force for each target hit. making this skill fairly good, especially when you need to try and keep up your life force to keep your rotation going. Now, other good things: a Signet of Vampirism, passive healing, and some active damage, Well of Blood, big heal, as well as a light field, some regeneration, a nice AoE heal, as well as Consume Conditions, nice skill to basically have for certain fights where maybe conditions are really a problem, or perhaps your healers are just really bad at Condi cleansing. I like using Blood Fiend personally, especially on open world, as well as other minion utilities, basically trying to create as many targets for ads to go for instead of myself. Then two almost non-negotiables is a Well of Darkness, massive hits in skill, some 6 hits for over 3k. Chill, obviously we're getting a lot of effects from Chill, so that's always really good, as well as a nice AoE 5 target and a combo field Dark. The combo Dark field being extremely good for blindness, Dark Aura, which is basically an aura reducing incoming condition damage, as well as producing some torment, lifesteal, and even leeching bolts. So combo field Dark, extremely good for survivability as well as a little bit of DPS. Then the Well of Suffering, again 6 hits, this one over 4k, and obviously these will go up with might and the like, providing nice vulnerability as well as also a combo Dark finish. And remember, this is unblockable, so yeah, extremely good. Then for our utility that we can consider switching out, You Are Weaklings, another shout skill, incredibly strong. Massive damage, increased when in melee range, gaining boons, increased when in melee range again, stun break 5 targets, and also you gain more boons on more targets hit. Massive hit-in skill, and just yeah, what's nice about the skill in general is there's no cast time, so we can use this in between other skills quite easily. Now Necromancer in general has access to some amazing skills. CPC, the Corrosive Poison Cloud for some projectile destruction. Epidemic, obviously not going to do as great because we are power focused, but still fairly useful for AoE. Blood is power, extra source of might, as well as self bleeds. Spectral Grasp, a good AoE pull. We've got things like Spectral Armor, Spectral Ring, as well as one of my favorite, Spectral Walk, being able to use the skill and obviously run over and teleport yourself back to where you started the skill from. You got a couple of really useful signets, especially things like Signet of Spite for the increased power, not the worst thing in the world. And then some utilities extremely good for the open world. All of your minion utilities here, very good. They're basically useful for trying to basically take aggro off of mobs in the open world so that you can just carry on doing DPS and self-heal. And then you have obviously a utility like the Flesh Worm. This is an extremely useful skill in some fights like your Doom, as well as some strike missions to projectile block, as well do a bit of passive damage. When used active, you will teleport to the worm and kill it, making it quite a good skill as well. If there is a spot in a fractal or a raid that you need to get to, you can use the skill, place it there, leave the worm to do a bit of DPS, and then activate it to get there instantly. And then an incredibly good skill as well, Well of Corruption. This allows you to also get 6 hits of not as much damage, gain some life force, as well as convert boons on your foe into conditions. And this is extremely useful in certain fights like your Kadeem ones, allowing you to basically try and skip your stab higher if that is what you want to do. And yeah, extremely good skill overall. And now for our elite utilities, Flesh Golem is generally what's taken. The Flesh Golem will do a bit of extra DPS. When activated, will do a massive 332 Defiance Break bar damage. It's also a launch skill, which is quite good to know, so you can control certain ads in fights. It also gives you stability, and yeah, it's generally what is taken, especially when CC is required. However, in certain fights where big burst is known and you know it's coming, like your keep constructs and things like this, you can look at something like Lich Form. Lich Form is extremely strong. When cast the skill, you'll basically want to use skill 4, Summon Madness. You use this and then you can come out of Lich Form, and these minions here will basically explode on the target and do some massive DPS. So Lich Form extremely good for big burst fights, especially if you are doing something silly like on open world. If you're doing triple trouble, when you know that the burst phase is coming for the worm, you can precast this for some big spike damage. And now let's go straight to the rotation concept. First of all, you want to make sure that Flesh Golem is summoned, or if you have any other minion utilities for that specific fight, that they're summoned. Now for general rotation purposes, what we want to do is start off with Greatsword 5 and 4. We want to go Grasp in Darkness into Nightfall. We want to use all 3 of our utility skills and then go into Reaper Shroud. Remembering also that your Weaklings is a skill you can cast while other skills are going off. Now when inside of Reaper Shroud, we want to use skill 2 Death Charge at least 3 times in a rotation if possible. After the second time we use Death Charge, we will use Soul Spiral afterwards. Then after the third Death Charge, we will use Executioner Scythe and then Exit Shroud. That is your timer window. Now obviously we need to build up enough life force to be able to stay in Reaper Shroud that long. What we will do in the interim is use auto attacks to reduce the cooldowns of all of these abilities so that our rotation can flow. But you will never ever delay Reaper Shroud. So even if that means you have to skip a couple of great sword, staff, dagger skills, whatever, we want to make sure that we're not leaving out this Reaper Shroud rotation, as this is where the big DPS is. Remember that Life Reap, the initial swing on our auto attack chain, is reducing the cooldown of these skills. So don't forget about your auto attacks in between these skills. Then we will exit out. We will go into Shroud on both sets of weapons. So we'll go on a Greatsword and then we'll go either on a Staff or on a Dagger Torch or on an Axe Warhorn. When exiting, you want to hit 1 or 2 skills in the tree and then switch over to the other weapon set and start building up life force again. Now majority of our DPS will probably come from the Greatsword other than Reaper Shroud. So we want to prioritize skills 5, 4 and 2 and 3. This is what we will use, especially when above 50%. When below 50%, we will spam Gravedigger skill 2, as this will basically come off of cooldown instantly, because when targets are below 50% health, it has 100% recharge time. We will ignore our auto attack rotation when that happens. So above 50%, we will auto attack, and below 50, we will ignore auto attacks and just use Gravedigger. You can throw in a Death Spiral if you are struggling for life force. So don't forget about skill 3. We will definitely use skills 5 and 4 still though, because those are quite big skills, as well as providing some life force. Now depending on what your off weapon set is, you will change your rotation accordingly. Obviously if you are inside of Staff, Reaper's Mark is big damage. Chill Blades is fairly decent damage with Chill, and remember we want to keep up a decent amount of Chill uptime, and obviously Mark of Blood is fairly good. You can ignore Putrid Mark unless you do want Conduit Cleanse. This can be fairly good, but those couple of skills and then immediately go into either Reaper Shroud or switch over to your Greatsword. If you are using a dagger, you want to prioritize either Dark Pack into Life Siphon or just Life Siphon by itself. Life Siphon is hitting like a train, and that's why they're using the dagger for benching, because of those 9 massive hits increased by 50% if the target is bleeding. If it isn't bleeding, just make sure to use Dark Pack before you use Life Siphon to basically put bleeding on the target, making the skill hit extremely hard. That means that your torch isn't actually even part of your rotation, so you don't have to worry about torch 4 and 5. You can use them however though for CC or for whatever utility. That also means that you can use the Warhorn technically or whatever you want. You can auto attack with the dagger to build up a lot of life force, because that's where a lot of life force comes in for heal scourges and things like that. And yeah, extremely high life force on this dagger. Now obviously if you're using Axe, you'll use Axe 2 before going into Shroud and when exiting Shroud. You can obviously use Axe 3 to make sure that we are keeping up our Spiteful Talisman, the 10% extra damage with targets that don't have boons. So obviously good boon strips and things like that are going to work wonders for you. And that's it. That's pretty much the rotation. If you can make sure that you're getting your Greatsword skills off, going into Reaper Shroud, trying to get off 3 skill 2s, make sure that you use skill 4 and 5 for the second and third hits, using all of your wells off of cooldown, not letting them just sit there, as well as then using your off weapon and using a couple of big hidden skills, especially if you are using dagger 2 with bleed or dagger 3 and 2, you're going to be hitting like an absolute train. This is an extremely high AoE class with big DPS, and if you can especially not get hit by stray attacks, wasting your life force, this rotation is so fluid that it is quite fun to play. Remember, if you are using this on open world, going as many minion skins as possible or taking skills that provide you with other utilities is extremely strong. And yes, this Reaper build is probably one of the best builds that is compatible for raiding, open world, and fractals. Again, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed the guide. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a like and a subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, thank you so much for watching anyway, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.